I can't do this alone.
She scoffed. You brought this upon yourself, Kolapo. Eyes darted left and right. No one was watching. And then, quickly, he threw her over the bridge. For a second, there was silence. And then... Weeks had passed since Kolapo threw Tiwa's body over the bridge. He had gone back to his normal routine, managing roller superstores, smiling at customers, acting like everything was fine. But the truth was, he wasn't fine. Every night, he woke up drenched in sweat, dreaming of Tiwa's lifeless eyes staring at him. Every time he heard sirens in the distance, his heart skipped a beat. But as the days passed, and no police came knocking, he slowly began to convince himself that he had gotten away with it, until one afternoon, his phone vibrated. Kolapo glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number. It read, "I know what you did." Kolapo's hand turned cold. Fear gripped him. His heart became shallow as his mind raced. Who was this? What do they know? Was it about Tiwa? Did someone see him at the bridge that night? His fingers trembled as he locked his phone. He needed to do something. Kolapo rushed home immediately. He burst into the living room where Motorayo was calmly sipping a glass of wine, flipping through a magazine like she didn't have a care in the world.
Rayo, we have a problem.
She didn't look up. What is it this time? Kolapo handed her the phone. She read the message, then laughed. Kolapo frowned.
Why are you laughing?
Motorayo sipped her wine and smirked. Because you are acting like a fool. Did you do anything? Kolapo's mouth opened, but no words came out. She leaned forward, her voice cold. You see? So long as you don't own up to anything, then you did nothing. She tossed the phone back at him. Now, get out and get back to work. Kolapo clenched his fists. How could she be so calm? Didn't she understand that somebody knew? But there was no arguing with Motorayo. So he left, forcing himself to ignore the message. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over, because whoever sent that message was watching. Kolapo went back to roller superstores, forcing himself to focus on work. He pretended like everything was normal, but it wasn't. Every time his phone vibrated, his heart stopped. For days, nothing happened. No calls, no follow-up messages. Kolapo convinced himself that the initial message must have been a mistake or a prank. Kolapo left his office late that evening, his heart still pounding from the message. The air was thick, and a strange uneasiness settled in his chest as he walked towards his car. Then he felt it, a presence behind him. Slowly he turned his head and saw a faceless man dressed in black walking behind him. Kolapo's stomach dropped.
Who was this? Did he see me that night? Is he the one sending me the messages?
His pulse raced. His mind screamed at him to move. Then he saw them. Two more faceless men, also in black, walked towards him from the side. Terror gripped his entire body. The first man behind him started walking faster. The two by the side picked up their pace. They were coming for him. Fear gripped him as Kolapo spun around and ran. His feet pounded the pavement as he dashed towards the bridge, the very same bridge where he had dumped Tiwa. The men were right behind him. Their footsteps grew louder. Kolapo reached the edge of the bridge, his chest heaving. Nowhere else to run. No escape. Without thinking, he jumped. The world spun. The air rushed past him as the water beneath grew closer and closer. And then Kolapo jolted awake, gasping for air. His body was drenched. For a moment, he thought he was still in the water. But no, he was in his bed. Then he heard her. Get up, sleepyhead. You are late for work. Kolapo wiped his face and looked up. Motorayo stood over him, an empty bucket in her hand. She had poured water on him. His heart still pounded, his breath still ragged. It was just a dream, but why did it feel so real? Motorayo rolled her eyes. You look like you have seen a ghost. Get ready and get to work. Kolapo couldn't shake the feeling that this was a warning. Later that day, another message came in. You can pretend all you want, but I still know what you did. If you want this to go away, you will have to pay. Kolapo almost dropped his phone. His heart pounded as his eyes darted around his office. Was he being watched? He rushed to the window, scanning the street. Nothing. Just customers walking in and out of the supermarket. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Who was doing this? His hands shook as he dialed the number, but the line was switched off. Kolapo staggered back into his chair, gripping the table for support. He needed to figure out who was behind this before it was too late. That evening, when he got home, he checked the compound carefully before entering. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every noise made him jump. Motoria was in the living room painting her nails. She didn't even look up when he walked in. "You're late," she said flatly. Kolapo ignored her and slumped into the couch. He buried his face in his hands.
Rayo, they sent another message.
Motoria let out an irritated sigh. And so? Kolapo looked at her frustrated.
They said I have to pay. I think someone saw me that night.
Motoria finally looked up, bored. Kolapo, grow up. If they had proof, you'd be in handcuffs by now. Kolapo shook his head. What if they go to the police? Motoria smiled, her eyes cold. Then get rid of them before they do. Kolapo's stomach twisted. Did she mean that he should kill them? She picked up her glass of wine and took a slow sip. Find out who they are, Kolapo, before they find you. Kolapo shivered because he knew what she meant. This was just the beginning. That night, Kolapo paid a visit to Kule. Kule had been his closest friend for years, the one person he could always count on. Kolapo sat across from Kule in a dimly lit beer parlor, his hands shaking as he gripped his glass. Kule noticed. "Guy, what's up with you?" Kolapo looked around nervously, making sure no one was listening. Then, in a shaky voice, he told Kule everything about Motoria asking him to kill Tiwa and how he poisoned her and threw her body off the bridge. When he was done, silence filled the air. Kule's face was pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Then he whispered,
Kolapo, how could you?
Kolapo buried his face in his hands.
Kule, I swear I didn't want to, but Rayo, she made me do it.
Kule slammed his glass on the table.
Oh, shut up, Kola. So it was your wife who held your hands and poured the poison? Was it your wife that threw the body over the bridge?
Kolapo flinched.
You allowed that devil you married to turn you into a murderer.
Tears burned Kolapo's eyes.
Kule, please, I need your help. I don't know who is sending these messages. I am scared.
Kule sighed deeply and rubbed his forehead.
You are lucky I still consider you my friend. I'll find out who's behind this.
Kolapo exhaled in relief. At least someone was on his side. For the next few days, Kule worked quietly, trying to trace the unknown number. Kolapo waited, his heart in his throat every single day. Then, one evening, Kule called him. His voice was tensed.
Kolapo, I found him.
Kolapo's stomach dropped.
Who is it?
Kule took a deep breath.
His name is Lolu.
Kolapo's heart stopped. That's Tiwa's boyfriend. Tiwa had once mentioned she had a man, but Kolapo never thought much of it. Now, it seems the boyfriend knew what he had done, and he was coming for him. Kolapo gripped his phone tightly.
Kule, what do I do?
Kule's voice was cold.
You don't have many choices, Kolapo. Either you deal with him first, or he deals with you.
Kolapo barely slept anymore. Guilt, fear, paranoia, they followed him like shadows, but nothing prepared him for what he saw when he woke up the next morning. A message from Lolu, 10 million naira. Pay up and I will disappear forever. Ignore this and your wife, the police, and the whole world will know what you did. Kolapo sat up, his chest tightened. He knew it. This wouldn't stop. Even if he paid, Lolu would only come back for more. He had to end this. When he got to work that morning, he thought for a while before calling Wumi, one of his staff. She had been Tiwa's closest friend. If anyone knew where Lolu stayed, it would be her.
Wumi, please, I need your help,
he said, trying to keep his voice steady. It's about Tiwa. Wumi hesitated. Oga Kola, why are you asking about Tiwa? Have you found her?
No, I just need to talk to someone who she's close to. Maybe they can help with the information about her whereabouts. Do you know where Lulu lives?
There was silence. Then she sighed. Yes, I do. And just like that, Kolapo got everything he needed. That night, Kolapo dressed in all black, a dark hoodie, black gloves, and no trace of himself. He drove straight to Lolu's apartment. The area was quiet, no security, no CCTV. It was just perfect. Kolapo parked a few streets away and walked in the shadows until he reached the house. With careful hands, he used the pin to open the lock and slipped inside. The house was small and smelled of stale beer. Kolapo could hear soft snoring from the bedroom. He moved quickly. He entered the room, his heart pounding. Lulu lay on the bed asleep, unaware that someone had broken into his home. Kolapo reached for a pillow, his hands trembling as he placed it over Lulu's face. Then he pressed down. Lulu stirred, his body twitched, his hands flailed. But Kolapo held firm, his weight on the pillow until the struggling stopped. Lulu was dead. He had just taken another life. Kolapo took a step back, his breath shaky. No blood, no noise, the perfect crime. He moved carefully, wiping everything he touched. No fingerprints, no evidence. Quickly, he slipped out the same way he came, walking briskly back to his car. Kolapo drove home in silence. His hands were still shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. His mind raced, replaying the moment over and over. Lolu's last struggle, his final breath, the stillness after. Kolapo had expected relief, but all he felt was numbness. He had crossed the ultimate line, and now he could never return to the man he used to be. By the time he stepped into the house, it was past midnight. Motorayo was waiting. She sat in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, watching him like a hunter who had just trapped her prey. So, she asked, taking a slow sip, "Did you do it?" Kolapo swallowed, his throat dry. He couldn't speak. Motorayo smiled. "Of course you did." She stood up, walked to him and cupped his face in her hands. "Now, you are finally learning, my dear husband." Kolapo's stomach twisted. How could she be this cruel yet calm? He felt sick, but it was done. There was no turning back. The next morning, Kolapo's nightmare took a new turn. 2 police officers arrived at his house, but they didn't meet him. They met Motorayo instead. She stood at the entrance, calm, confident, and unshaken as they questioned her about Tiwa's disappearance.
Mrs. Aderemi, we have reason to believe that one of your employees, Miss Tiwa Oladipo, had been missing for weeks now. We are speaking with people who may have interacted with her before she disappeared.
Motorayo smiled politely. "Oh, that's unfortunate, but I wouldn't know anything about that. I own the supermarket, yes, but I work from home. My husband runs the business. He knows the staff better." The moment she said it, Kolapo was implicated. The police exchanged glances.
Your husband knows her well?
Motorayo nodded. "Oh, very well. After all, he sees them every day, but I doubt he knows anything about her disappearance." The police officers nodded, thanked her and left. Motorayo smiled as she shut the door. She had saved herself, but she had also just thrown Kolapo to the wolves. An hour later, the police officers arrived at Rula's superstores. Kolapo was in his office when they knocked. His hands turned sweaty instantly.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kolapo. We need to ask you some questions about Tiwa Oladipo, your employee.
Kolapo forced a nervous smile.
Oh, Tiwa. Yes, she used to work here.
The officers watched him closely.
When was the last time you saw her?
Kolapo swallowed hard.
It's been a while. She stopped showing up to work. I heard she left town.
The officer tilted his head.
Who told you that?
Kolapo froze. Damn, he had just made a mistake.
I mean, people at the supermarket said she hadn't come to work. I just assumed.
The officers watched him closely.
Do you have any personal relationship with her outside of work?
Kolapo's throat dried. He was trying not to look guilty, but his body betrayed him. His fingers tapped the table anxiously. His foot wouldn't stop bouncing.
Mr. Kolapo, do you know anything about Tiwa's whereabouts? No, officer. I have no idea where she is.
The air in the room felt suffocating. The policemen were convinced. The officers exchanged glances. They knew something wasn't right. One of them stood up.
All right, Mr. Kolapo, that will be all for now. But don't leave town. We're still investigating and may need your help again.
Kolapo forced a smile.
Of course, officers. Anything to help.
Kolapo knew the police weren't just asking. They were hunting. It was only a matter of time before they found out everything. And once they did, there would be no escape.
How did you know about Tiwa's disappearance? Who reported this?
His body shook. His entire world was falling apart. He quickly grabbed his phone and sent messages to Kunle.
Thank you for everything, my brother, but this is where my road ends.
To his mother and family.
I'm sorry for the shame I have brought upon you. Please, take care of my children.
Then, with his heart pounding, he grabbed his car keys and left the office. He knew what he had to do. He drove home to finish it. Kolapo arrived home and walked straight to the kitchen. His hands were steady as he reached for the gas cylinder. With one quick motion, he turned the knob fully open. The hissing sound of gas filled the air. Kolapo walked out of the house, closing the door behind him. He stood outside and waited. The air became heavy. The gas spread. Then, he pulled out his phone and called Motorayo. She answered immediately. Kolapo, what is it this time? She had perceived the smell and was heading towards the kitchen with the phone. Just as she reached the door, boom! The house exploded into flames, consuming everything. The roof collapsed. The windows shattered. The heat was unbearable. Motorayo burned, and with her, the monster she had become. Kolapo didn't flinch. He didn't run. He simply turned around, got into his car and drove straight to the police station. When Kolapo entered the station, the officers were already responding to the explosion. One of them recognized him immediately.
Mr. Kolapo, what's going on?
Kolapo took a deep breath. I am here to confess. The room went silent. The officer frowned.
Confess to what?
Kolapo looked him straight in the eye.
To everything.
After listening to his confession, the officers exchanged looks before one of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs. As the cold metal tightened against his wrists, Kolapo exhaled. For the first time in years, he felt free. Greed, betrayal, and sin may bring temporary pleasure, but they always come with a price. Kolapo traded his soul for money and lust. He tried to cover his mistakes with more mistakes, but in the end, he lost everything. Before you choose a partner, shine your eyes. If you enjoyed the story and would like to see more interesting stories, please consider subscribing to this channel, not forgetting to turn on the bell notification icon so that once another video is being posted, you will be the first to be notified. You can also check out these videos here. I promise you won't be disappointed. Till we meet again in my next video, remain blessed.